Hello and welcome.
This is High Point.
The podcast of the acoustic consultancy at Hallé Crescendo.
At High Point, we talk about public places,
Performance venues,
instruments,
acoustics,
and all things music related.
We are Marc, founder and director of Hallé Crescendo.
And Jake Cotier, co-founder and producer of High Point.
Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoy listening to us,
don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Hi Martin, hi Steve, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks Mark.
Yeah, well, fine, thank you very much. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having us in the basement of the Hallé St. Peter's. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, Steve first maybe?
Okay, I'm Steve Pickett, I'm the Education Director of the Hallé. I've been in the role 20 years, this is my 21st year. I'm a musician, so my background on that basis was music degree, postgraduate at the Royal College of Music as a bassoonist. I did some conducting. And then I went to the Ulster Orchestra where I was for 20 years as a second bassoon, principal concert bassoon. Came to the Hallé in 2002 as Education Director, and I've been here ever since. I suppose the main thing I do at the Hallé, other than obviously run that department, is I'm a composer and arranger.
Okay, I was going to ask, do you still have some musical activity?
Yeah, it's mostly writing. I don't play anymore.
Okay.
I've decided that I couldn't keep the standard on that sort of side, so bassoon has been sold. No reed making or anything like that. It's all out of the way. So I do a lot of writing from all sorts of combinations of instruments, from the full orchestra down to duos even. And the basic aim of all that is to bring professional music makers working alongside community members, whether it's a child or whether it's a pensioner or how that works.
Great. Interesting. How about you, Martin?
So my name's Martin Glynn. I'm the venues director for the Hallé. So I look after this sort of strategic and operational management of the two venues that the Hallé owns and operates, which are Hallé St. Peter's, which is the venue we're in at the moment, and sort of our sister venue, which is just around the corner, which is Hallé at St. Michael's. Both of those venues are in Ancoats in Manchester. I've been at the Hallé for 18 years. This is sort of my second role within the organisation, having moved from initially working in the sponsorship and fundraising team. And then I moved over when we started the St. Peter's project to look at the commercial opportunities that owning a venue would bring to the organisation. And so I sort of subsequently have kind of pivoted to then, not only kind of once you get commercial bookings into the space, not just bringing them in, but then also delivering those activities within the building. So that's been my kind of sort of journey within the
That's quite interesting and it's going to be interesting for other episodes and maybe also the audience that we're having, because there's a lot of people we're going to interview or who we have interviewed who are really interested in the financial side of it, how you run a place, but how also you fundraise to build a place or renovate a place. So hopefully you can share some experience in that as well.
Yeah, as best as we're able. I don't think there is a magic booklet of just do this and it'll happen.
Yeah.
Lots of stars have to align. Strategy is important, ambition is important, vision is important.
Yeah.
Connections are important.
I could say Martin's a brilliant networker. Absolutely amazing networker. Martin knows all those connections.
I may need to get some experience in that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's
networking
an important. But I think City of Manchester's a good place to network in. It's a big city, but small enough that you can make an impact.
Especially for music.
Yeah. And there's a genuine kind of I suppose ecology within sort of the music scene in the city that is interconnected. So it doesn't take long to get from one person to the next.
Yeah.
Somebody will know somebody else quite quickly if you need something or indeed they need you. So
which is pretty useful.
Yeah.
And I guess Manchester is still a big city, but you still get that like proximity within the communities and between the communities as well.
Absolutely, yes. That's absolutely the case with with all the sort of education and community work.
Yeah.
You know, we've got those connections in all the main boroughs, if you like, and that we've grown those because it's not too big.
Yeah.
You know, it's been really a useful thing to have.
So, well, good transition. What's the Hallé? The first time I spoke to you, you said it's not the Hallé, it's the Hallé Orchestra Society. Is that right?
Hallé Concert Society.
Concert Society.
Yes.
And when has it always been like this? Has it changed? And
Well-
how did the Hallé start?
Yeah.
Okay, so the potted history of the Hallé, which potted history of 164 years of
Yeah.
history. Well, shall I start, Steve?
You go on, go for
Okay,
it.
so the Hallé was founded in Manchester by Charles Hallé, later Sir Charles Hallé, who was German immigrant, came to the UK earlier in the 1800s, and ended up in Manchester in 1857, connected to something called the Arts Treasures exhibition, which took place on pretty much the space where Old Trafford football ground is now, which was a large, well, sort of exactly what it said. It was an exhibition of art treasures of the time. And that was a sort of a full year event, and he was asked to come and pull together the orchestra that would play at the exhibition on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that meant that he pulled in through his sort of travels through Europe prior to arriving in the UK a very high calibre and high quality orchestral group which would play daily.
I think the other thing about Hallé was he knew the composers of the time.
Yeah.
So he had connections to Liszt, to Chopin, to Berlioz,
Yeah.
to Wagner, and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
he was bringing that music to Manchester, to England, to the UK.
Yeah, so at the end of the exhibition, he'd accumulated, this ensemble, and didn't want that ensemble to, just dissipate
To die, yeah.
and go with the exhibition. So he began his own series of concerts, Mr. Charles Hallé's orchestral concerts, which were staged at the Free Trade Hall, the first incarnation of the Free Trade Hall. The first concert being the 30th of January, 1858.
A long time ago.
And the Hallé has been playing continually in the city ever since.
Yeah, I mean, in that first year, I think there were 12 concerts. He made £5,000. That was it.
Yeah.
Basically, there was enough of a calling. And of course, in those days, they were gentlemen's concerts. So ladies weren't allowed. It was just gentlemen's concerts that set the thing off. But as Martin has said, from then it just bloomed.
Well, he kind of introduced, the city was going through a sort of phenomenal economic transformation at that time. It's kind of centre of the industrial world, really, world's first industrial city. And the wealth of the city probably enabled him to kind of begin something, and met sort of sponsors and supporters that kind of backed him in that pursuit. But also, it brought, I suppose, a more Central European element of culture with it. And so he introduced, kind of created the musical life of the city, really, in a way. Not that music didn't exist in the city previously, but kind of, I guess he's, the original concert promoter. He's the original, in a city that's now full of, probably some of the world's biggest pop music concert promoters are based in Manchester. But he was there doing it, and indeed some of the world's biggest bands are out of Manchester. But I always say the original Manchester band is the Hallé. So the orchestra became known as the Hallé Orchestra, Mr. Hallé's Orchestra, the Hallé Orchestra, which is unusual because I suppose in other cities it might have been known as the Manchester Manchester Symphony Orchestra. But because he was sort of the pivotal driving force behind it, it became known after him, which makes us unique, I think.
I think you're right, Martin. I don't think there's any other orchestra in the world that's named in a similar way. Let's put it that way.
I don't know any of those.
Yeah. So he lived until
1895.
Yeah.
And then in 1899 they constituted the Hallé Concert Society. And it had 50 members to start with. And I did clock up today that currently we have 242 members of the society. And we've had 8 principal conductors or music directors since then. So the Hallé tends to keep their conductors for quite a long time. So the current incumbent, Sir Marc has been at the Hallé since the year 2000.
Okay.
So a long time. Most orchestras, anything between 3, 5, 10 years or whatever, but not to be doing it for that sort of time. So some really notable conductors we've had in the past have been following Hallé was Carl Richter, and Richter knew Wagner. So again, that big European connection, and a lot of that music that had never been performed in the UK before was being brought through the Hallé
Yeah.
to Manchester and elsewhere as well, obviously within UK. And probably the most famous conductor we've had in the role was Sir John Barbaroni in 1943, and he sort of rescued the orchestra around the time of the wars and so on. And
arrived to Manchester where there was no orchestra really left.
Yeah,
most of them had gone to serve.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the Second World War, and indeed the Free Trade Hall had been bombed.
Yeah.
So the concert hall didn't exist either. So he kind of came and had to reconstruct.
Redo it,
So it was the conductors who were also the managers managing everything
For a period of time, I think certainly probably from Barbaroli's time onwards, there will have been. I mean, I will confess I don't know how the organisation has been constituted in every year of its operation, but certainly by the I guess by the mid-50s there was probably a structure emerging that we would recognise part of now. It was kind of a general manager, a music director, somebody that looked after artistic planning, somebody that help kind of stage manage,
and the
those
marketing
sorts of
side of it all, that sort of thing.
Sales and kind of artist liaison and all of those sorts of things that a 21st century orchestra does. And then of course the 21st century orchestra doesn't really look like a 1950s orchestra.
No.
Our activity and indeed our reach is very different, and the way in which we reach people is very different. So I suppose that the great thing about working for an organisation like the Hallé is you become very aware that you are merely a custodian for a period of time. A critical part of your work is to ensure that it's probably healthier than, it's at least as healthy as when you arrived.
Yeah.
You feel that weight of kind of make sure that it's still going. When at whatever time you choose to leave. As you've heard, Steve and I have both been with the organisation for a while, and I think that is indicative of the feel of the place that there is. We quite often talk about the Hallé family, and that isn't that's not just a kind of cheesy kind of title. There is a very familiar or familial feel about the organisation, and that's audience, players, administration. That there are long-lasting relationships that come out of the organisation. I think that's what makes it very special. It's the thing that's always appealed to it about me is that a bit like we were talking about sort of the networks of how the musical ecology, but actually I think socially that works in Manchester as well. You kind of it doesn't take long for you to know somebody who knows somebody, and I think those connections often come back. The very broad sort of communities that connect with the Hallé, and I think that's something that people cherish about the organisation.
Yeah,
they feel part of it, and it feels part of them.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say, because Martin's obviously from Manchester, but I'm not. And coming into the place, taxi drivers, they might not be part of your regular audience or anything like that, but people in shops or whatever, they all know.
Yes.
They've all heard of the Hallé. The Hallé is incredibly well known, and particularly in my world, it does open doors when you're trying to get into certain schools and things like that. But that's really, really special, as Martin said. It's a family.
Yeah.
But it's a family in Manchester, isn't it?
But I would say that we don't take that for granted. Much of what Steve's work particularly is about is making sure that recognition, that cross society recognition continues.
Absolutely.
Long after we've gone. That a big part of what we're trying to achieve, probably, and actually St Peter's and Steve's work in education play a part in that, is that that recognition of Hallé and association with the Hallé, that that it's something of the city and of for the city.
Yeah.
Is a very I think it's a part of the essence of who we are. So and you know, taking it back to Hallé himself, he was very keen as he developed from you know allowing more than just the gentlemen to come to the concert, but actually he was very keen from the off that economically people were able to afford. So there was a range of tickets, so that I suppose it wasn't just for the you know, high society, it was for everybody, and you know, music for everybody is I think is at the core of what we do now. So you know, I think
he was a real music educator.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you know, he brought all this music that nobody had ever heard in most cases from Europe, but very much, as Martin's saying, you know, of those community connections and educating the audience into, you know, you like this, but you might also like this, and that sort of approach in his programming. And that had a massive effect on the whole industry in the way that that's developed over the years. And I suppose the main big changes from what we've been talking about now, in the 1980s, the Arts Council, which has obviously been a big supporter of orchestras across the nation, started to basically look at arts organisations and say, well, look, you're getting all this public money, but you cannot just play to your audience. You've got to have what they called then was outreach. So that's when, you know, we talked about you know, the music directors and the principal conductors and a small team of managers that went with that. That's when things started to broaden in terms of, in a sense, connecting to those that don't come to your concerts.
Yeah.
And that revolution had happened across the country, as I say, in the 1980s, and that's where these education and community programs have come out. So that's where the Hallé means so much more to the region in the way that it works. It's not just, I mean, Martin mentioned the family, Hallé family. Part of that are all the different parts of the Hallé. So we've got the orchestra, we've got the choir that Hallé started at that same time. But also we've got these amazing youth ensembles that come with the package. Again, looking at the future of talent and how we as an organisation can play a big role in the development of that talent. Not only just for our continuation, if you like, but just in the way that might move out into the community in so many different areas. So we've got, you know, Hallé Youth Orchestra, and we've got players that in the orchestra now that have come through those sort of setups. We've got the Hallé Youth Choir.
Yep.
We've got the Hallé Children's Choir. We've got the Hallé Youth Training Choir, and something called the Choral Academy, and that's for singers that want to develop their singing, perhaps not on the edges of coming into the Hallé Choir, but people, local people who want to develop that side, and we provide that, so that talent development. Then, of course, you've got all the education programs.
Well, we mustn't forget our community choir.
And the community choir, yes, of course, Martin, which was a really, really interesting thing. It was started. I was partly involved in the setup, and I went to the very first session. And we had sort of like, you know, 3 people and a dog, and we were sort of thinking, you know, is this actually going to carry on or whatever, you know? So we got this thing going. And how many people do you get now, Martin?
It's sort of 70 regularly.
70 or 80, It's been amazing.
Great.
So that's essentially a singing for pleasure group, and sort of the community element is key to it. And I suppose it's community in both its senses, isn't it? That it is that we draw from the community locally and a bit further afield, but you know, certainly the community of Manchester, Greater Manchester. But also that the choir then becomes a community of its own, and it you know, in these times where perhaps, you know, we talk about social isolation and we talk about, you know, mental health and all of those things, that we've got a group of people who come together, and the pleasure element of singing is absolutely critical. It's not always about the concert platform or the you know, it's about the joy of participation and the joy of singing, and you know, and you know, it must be said, they make a lovely sound too.
Yeah, to combat loneliness.
Yeah.
I mean, there's as far as I know, there's 2 members of the choir that have been sort of prescribed by their GPs that they need to come and get involved.
Yeah.
And so it's part of that, as Martin mentioned, that well-being and you know, mental health contributing to help in that.
So how do you join those groups, all those choirs? Do you have a certain level? Do you have an audition?
So the community choir is completely free access. Just turn up. There is a small charge to come on a weekly basis. What sort of subscription amount? The choral academy is a kind of, as Steve explained, it's kind of like a bit like an evening class in singing. So that's something that people will elect to do to sort of develop themselves as singers. The Hallé choir, the performing choir, the Hallé choir, which, as Steve said, formed around the same time as the orchestra by Sir Charles, that is an auditioned group. And there's a main choir, and then there's some associate members, and they have quite large commitments to kind of perform in each year. We're recording this in December, and they're about to enter into probably their busiest time of year, as they perform several concerts in a very short space of time in the weeks to come. But they're constantly busy, and are the big choral occasions are, for me, very much highlights of the Hallé season, when the choir and the orchestra come together. They may happen sort of 3-4 times a season in addition to the Christmas stuff. So,
and the children get involved in some of those concerts as well, when those semi-choruses and things like that are required for some of the pieces. The youth choir play that role, and then some of the really big symphonies, some of the Mahler symphonies, where you've got a children's chorus actually in it. That obviously the Hallé children's choir plays that role.
So the youth ensembles and the children's choir, they are auditioned groups, but there are no charges to be part of those groups. So my understanding was that sort of in their inception that we wanted to provide the highest quality musical experience for children and young people outside of specialist music colleges. So that if the Hallé Youth Orchestra would be a comparable standard to ensembles that you find within specialist music colleges. So we are very proud of the fact that we, as things stand, and funding is always a challenge, but as things stand, we don't ask for any contributions from those members. That their parents don't pay for them to be part of those groups. The only barrier to entry is aptitude and talent. And we use, as Steve has already pointed out, the opportunities that come from those groups are about development of talent, interacting with the professional side of the organisation, having some master classes, and we provide them with some performance opportunities which they can only get through their association with us, which is really sort of spectacular.
I think the other thing to say about it is that those ensembles are within a wider strategy for the region. So we have 2 education music hubs. We have the Greater Manchester one, which with the Hallé is a strategic partner, and we are delivery partners to the Manchester Youth Hub, and those organisations have their ensembles as well, out in the regions, as it were, across Greater Manchester, and we take children and young people obviously from those groups who then come into the Hallé, our youth ensembles from that. But it's all part of a system. So their musical journey would start, say, in a Bolton music service or Oldham music service, whatever the case may be, and we are involved with that development within our work with those music services. But ultimately, one of the interesting ways this works is then some of those children then come into our ensembles and then go back as ambassadors for the whole thing. Okay. So it's all a way of encouraging talent, and just as important as for the child, it's about helping parents to understand the progression system, because one of the biggest issues that we have with all this is, I've got a really gifted child. What do I do? Where do I go? And so we're part of that network for the whole region, and that all helps it feed in. And I don't think there's a better place in the country in terms of the way that works, certainly within the Music Hub system, than in Greater Manchester.
It's all really interesting, and I didn't realise how massive the Hallé was until I spoke to you. And it also feels like it's a bit of a music school that has and certain outreach and engagement with the community instead of just being an orchestra. It's a concert society, isn't it? It's not just an orchestra.
Yeah, it's a concert society. I mean, just to explain that, there are 80 full-time members of the orchestra, and I mean, I still grin about it now. But when I was a player, so many people used to say, "Well, you're in the orchestra, but what do you do for your day job?" Well, this is the job, so they've got a lot of individual practice to be able to keep to that standard, because the standards are and have to be very high.
Yeah.
And then the players are involved in rehearsing. Obviously, they're involved in recording, but they're also obviously doing concerts. So the orchestra itself does about 130 concerts a year. 70 of those.
That's quite
a lot. 70 of those at the Bridgewater Hall, which is our main concert base within the Greater Manchester region. And then, of course, over the years and history from Hallé, the first city, if you like, that the Hallé played in other than Manchester was out to Bradford, so that relationship still continues. We play regularly in Sheffield, Nottingham, Stoke, Blackburn. We go up to Newcastle to the Sage, Gateshead. We play regularly in London in the BBC Proms. We go down to Birmingham and so on. So the orchestra has this network, takes us down to Cardiff occasionally, Warwick, where we're doing all these concerts everywhere. But I think it's fair to say, Martin, isn't it? We're a much more flexible organisation now because of what we do here now.
Yeah. I mean, So the concept of the concert society was it sort of formed out of post Hallé's death. There were a group of enthusiasts who didn't want to see his legacy dismantled. Yeah. So they got together and created this society with the intention of then sort of continuing the musical life of the city. And in essence, that's the organisation, which is a registered charity so it was constituted as a registered charity in 1899, wasn't it? Yeah. So we've worked for the Concert Society, for all our time here, and the society's essence is to continue this musical life of the city. So obviously that evolves as society evolves, and when music education provision in schools changed, as it did during the 80s, the Hallé as an organisation then understood that we needed to act and indeed that's what
that change,
we do. So our I suppose right at the essence of what we do is we try to get the music of the Hallé and understanding of the. I suppose we should never be shy in saying it. Really, he says spluttering before he says it, but excellence and musical excellence being something that we really value. That aiming for the best that you can be is something that we really take pride in, and we're not apologetic about that. So we see that what we do should try to be the pinnacle of musical achievement, if you like. Yeah. So therefore we want to provide high quality experiences for everybody that we work with always. And as Steve says, that could be child at a education event, or a pensioner at a community event, or that could be somebody sitting in the Bridgewater Hall listening to a concert. So that a quality experience is very, very important.
I'll give you an example of that particularly. We were involved. I won't mention names. But we were involved in working with a school in a challenging part of Greater Manchester, and to put it bluntly, these kids were off the wall a bit. So we were running some creative music classes with this particular group, and one of our cellists, who was particularly talented in the way that he would work with children, had got a certain amount of creativity delivered, and it was all going well. Then the kids had probably just had enough of a concentration, and I arrived to sort of just finish off the end of the session, and I walked in, and there was this cellist with all these kids sitting around him playing Bach cello suites, which was just, he's a superb player, but actually to be able to just sit there and play, you can never underestimate the effect of a brilliant player on a group of anybody, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And with these children who were definitely challenging, were just sitting there completely, dare I say it, gobsmacked at what was going on, but he was just playing Bach cello suite. And it was
really
one of the
amazing.
most remarkable experiences I think I've had in this job, just seeing how that just happened.
Yeah, the power of music. I
Oh, it's
suppose
brilliant.
that's-
That's absolutely amazing. Yeah.
We'll, I'll keep saying it on this podcast. Music is so important, and it's very accessible when we want to, and it's got so many benefits for everything socially, for our intelligence, for our mental health, for some disabilities. I'm just reading a book, and I'm reading probably 4 pages a night, but to get me sleeping. But it's a book on. It's called the Brain Symphony. It's in French, but I really hope there's a translation in English.
Right.
And yesterday I read that playing music and getting into the rhythms, or learning how to have set rhythms and be structured with the rhythms, can really help you with reading, not just and language development as well. Not just speaking, but also reading and understanding letters. Because whenever we read with a certain rhythm, and so it helps us learn and improve our reading. So it's just something I read yesterday. But maybe the next for the next episode I'll have something else. But to summarize that, yeah, music is so important, and every child, to me, should have access to music, or singing, or any musical activity is great. I had a question, but I can't remember now. Sorry. I saw that you had. Oh yes, that's it. Music genre and styles. Do you focus on some certain styles, or do you teach all of them?
Well, as the non-musician, I'm going to let Steve.
I think what I can say here, one of the joys of my job is that I've got 80 musicians in front of me.
Yeah.
And they're musicians. Yeah, they play their Mahler and their Beethoven and all that sort of stuff. They're expert at that. But ultimately, they are musicians. So we've got Irish fiddlers, we've got Cuban music specialists, we've got jazzers, we've got songwriters, we've got electronic music. There's all those different skills. So whilst we would be necessarily in some of our creative work with schools, obviously we bring in children to concerts, we take that music that we perform in the concert, and then we help the children create their own version. It's very much owned by them, and what sort of the different styles that they come up with as much to do with the players they're working with. So everything goes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the joys of, as I say, of my job is that creative side can take many, many different forms. And so you might start with a group of children. You might be working with a Mozart symphony, and by the time the end of it, you've got a jazz piece that's come out of it,
Yeah.
or whatever. And that's again, in Martin's menu, it's the power of music, the way that can work. So whilst we are obviously connecting audiences to the orchestra and what we play, the variety of music that the Hallé plays is quite extensive. It's more these days than it has been in the past. So yes, we do our big classical concerts, and with Sir Marc Elder, one of the areas that he's particularly expertise in is opera. So the orchestra does opera performances and so on at the Bridgewater Hall, and they're very grand, and the quality is absolutely amazing because it has to be, and all that sort of thing. But we also do, ABBA tribute concerts. We've got a concert coming up next Friday with Claire Teal. So it's a sort of a Christmas jazzy sort of a night. So there's plenty of variety of work that we do as an orchestra, and a variety of different ensembles within the orchestra. So we play obviously regularly with 80 players, but some of the concerts we would try over 100 players. So some of those extra players, they're freelance pool that within the Greater Manchester and the North of England setup, but a lot of them are actually associates of the Hallé, so people that we regularly call on. And one of the things that always amazes me is the way that Sir Marc Elder, for instance, he just knows everybody. So somebody comes, he'll know exactly who they are, and they've played for him before and so on. So that you keep that ensemble as much as possible, be the same clientele, same sort of people. and that helps you again build that excellence within the ensemble.
Great. How connected are you with the Cheetham Music School, RNCM? Where do you sit as well? Do you
Well, I suppose-
do you come as an add-on?
I
to
mean,
them?
it's worth noting that the Royal Northern College of Music, as it now is, was started by Hallé.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
So there's an intrinsic,
Yeah.
existential link, I suppose, of between the organisation. And as Steve said, I mean, we work. Actually, probably Steve can talk more loosely than.
I can tell you, the
I.
players teach at both institutions. So we've got a number of our players, obviously, are professors, and they call them that teach at the Royal Northern College of Music. But we also have another group that teach at Cheetham's. And in fact, the sort of co-principal of Cheetham's used to be the second horn in the Hallé, and has now moved on to those different roles. So there's a clear tie-up across those organisations in terms of that development of talent, which is again where we're very much part of that for the region. So as Martin said, the Royal Northern College, as it is now, was set up to provide musicians for the Hallé. And of course, it's a much broader organisation now, and we were involved with them with some of our professional experience schemes, where our musicians are working with those students, and they take the very best of those, get an opportunity to come into the Hallé and play within these education programmes. But I'm pleased to say one of the projects that I started off back in 2003 was this thing called the Professional Experience Scheme for Wind, Brass and Percussion. Because we'd had a string scheme that had been going for quite a while, but we didn't do anything for the wind and brass and percussion, as I say. And 3 of our musicians now within the Hallé have come through that scheme. So our 2 flutes and our second horn are products of that professional experience scheme. It's also a way that we can look at the talent, in a sense, and see where that, how we can play our part in the development of that talent. So we work very closely with both institutions in terms of how we can provide that professional connection to that.
It's great. I saw on your website that you had the Siemens Hallé International Conductors Competition.
Yeah.
Who's that for? Is that for any conductor?
So we've just announced there are 8 shortlisted for the next
Finals,
competition, which takes place in early in 2023. So the Hallé's sort of had a long, certainly since Sir Marc has been in post, kind of a considerable sort of commitment to developing young conductors, and indeed a number of sort of the alumni of our associate conductor scheme are now incredibly well known. So I think the first that worked with Marc is Ed Gardner. Who's now gone on to
principal conductor of the London Philharmonic and out in Norway. So, I mean, just an amazing sort of conductor within the realm of the system now, but started that process as Sir Marc's assistant.
So the competition itself is international in its intention, and it provides the winner of the competition. I think initially it's a 2-year association with the organisation, so they work alongside the Hallé's music director. And they also become the principal conductor of our youth orchestra, and they get to kind of, I suppose, at a micro level, experience the process of being a music director, setting the musical direction and intention for a group, working with an administration to deliver a programme across a couple of seasons. So our current associate conductor is.
Diliana Lazarova.
Thanks for saying her surname, because that always trips me up, Steve.
Yeah, she's Bulgarian, and she has been in that role. I think she's just about, in the summer she comes to the end of that role. Has been absolutely amazing. I mean, I think one of the wonders of this job is that where we've come across really fantastic talent, the Hallé rides with that talent during that contract. So they really do get a group of concerts with the orchestra, and they show their ability. They're given more, and the last incumbent, Jonathan Haywood, has just been made music director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in the US. And so Jonathan was
Brilliant.
with us for a few years, and then it's just gone on to great things after that. And I see absolutely that that Deliana will do the same. She's brilliant.
Yeah, she's got a
Well,
great
the-
career ahead of her.
Definitely.
No doubt.
What sort
So
of-
she was the she was
Yeah.
the first winner of the Siemens Hallé International Conductors Competition. So previously, selection of the associate director had a number of different sort of processes, but in 2020 we launched that competition. So Siemens have been a long-term sponsor and supporter of the Hallé, very much valued financially, but not just financially. They kind of, back to that sort of family conversation we were having before, that they kind of feel invested in more than just, pounds.
Yeah.
They sort of understand. They often sort of talk about, their association starts with having fun, enjoying themselves doing the music, but actually they kind of, they're interested to see how engineers and orchestras who are perhaps not,
Fascinating.
not immediately associated, the similarities between the organisations and that pursuit of excellence, I think is key to that. They would see themselves as an organisation that wants the best,
Yeah.
and that matches with the Hallé's values in many ways. So that competition, they came as part of their many and varied associations on a sponsorship level. That they backed that competition in 2020. And that enabled us to kind of perhaps broaden the reach of the competition. It allowed us to fish in a bigger pool, if you like, for the talent. And
Talents come from every continent.
Yeah.
We've even had, for Deliana's position, there were even applications from North Korea, from places where you really wouldn't necessarily think you would get.
So do you have
get
collaborations with schools or organisations outside of the UK to get known, be known
So
by
I
that talent?
suppose we are
Yeah.
internationally, because of the Hallé's international reputation.
True,
I suppose
yeah.
we are in a fortunate position. The Hallé's always toured internationally, and through its recording works, even sort of from the 1930s onwards, it's had an international reach. So Hallé's reputation is beyond the UK. And I think we benefit from that in this competition.
Definitely.
So the Hallé are out, and I suppose the benefit that you can see of previous incumbents of the post have gone on to great things. I guess it's probably perceived the association with the Hallé and the opportunities that the associate conductors post present provide. They're sought after for a young conductor who's trying to establish themselves at the start of their career. It's a very attractive proposition. So not just, you don't just have an association with the Hallé, I suppose, that comes through that. We'd look to find, as Steve said, partners and other organisations that they can work alongside, and so that becomes a kind of a, we benefit from their talent while they're here, and hopefully in turn they benefit from perhaps our address book, I suppose. In some ways that opens them up. The networking that we talked about earlier, that that happens at that level too. So
It's a very broad experience
Yeah.
that they're offered, though.
Yeah.
That's really
and
key.
with a light shone on them, I suppose that's the
Yeah.
that's the key to it. Yeah.
I mean, they do all the schools content, so they have to work with children as well as, as Martin said, they are music director of the Hallé Youth Orchestra. So it's really preparing them for that industry, which is changing. It's becoming a lot more flexible in its approach. We've had some great stars that have come through that already, and I'm sure this year or this season we will find the next one.